everyone. Today we will be discussing about land-based movements in light of environmental sociology. The objectives for today's study will be to understand the origin of environmental movements in India, and then we will focus on some of the major environmental movements that took place in India. The origin of environmental movements in India. The genesis of concern for environmental protection in India when people started protesting against the commercialization of forest resources during the British colonial period. At the international level, this growing salience of environmental crisis was brought out by four important events, which are: the first event was the United Nations Conference on Human Environment, which was held in Stockholm in Sweden in 1972. The second event was the publication of the report's Limits to Growth. The third was the release of the report from the Brundtland Commission entitled Our Common Future in the year 1987. And the fourth event was the Earth Summit, which took place in 1992. A large number of environmental movements emerged in India in the year, especially in the timeline of 1970s to 1980s. The impact of this movement was that it helped in creating a mass public awareness about bringing out the importance of a balance between environment and its development. It also helped in opposing developmental projects that are inimical to the society and also have environmental concerns. It also helped in organizing model projects that showed the way forward towards non-bureaucratic and participatory community-based natural resource management systems. The reasons for emergence of environmental movements in India can be traced back to the conflict between state and its inhabitants over control of natural resources, false developmental policies promised by the government, socioeconomic reasons, environmental degradation and destruction, and also spread of environmental awareness not only in India but across the world. The first of the kind of environmental problem and land-based reform movement which India saw was the mining problem. The source of this problem can be traced back to the mining societies. Mining societies have always been a center of contention with deep illicit enterprises and engagements creeping up in the system. The mining communities always felt insecure and unstable, for they were mired with controversies and doubts surrounding their occupations and livelihoods. The labor unions were continuously pressing for better living and working conditions. This created a spiral spring of migrant issues which made the mining workers move to and fro from the mining spots. Thus, it created a bedrock of crisis and uncertainties in an already frail situation. The private corporations and the state working in close association sparked all these movements even further. The rich land of bauxites in the Kashipur block of Orissa was posing a serious threat to the home and livelihoods of the tribal inhabitants. The state tactically colluded with multinational corporations to extract minerals from this tribal hinterland, leading to loss of land and occupation of these poor tribes. The Utkal Alumina International, or UAIL, a consortia between Norsk Hydro of Norway, Alcan of Canada, and Indale from India, was trying to initiate a project in this Kashipur block of Raigada district for past several years. They intended to build up a mining and processing unit of aluminium with the help of bauxite which was mined from the Bafli Plateau. This plateau was located on the borders of Raigada and Kalahandi districts of Orissa that housed about 196 million tons of bauxite. Studies indicated that while disposing this chemical waste produced from mining, red mud stacking would generate huge amount as much as 150 tons of sodium hydroxide every day, which would be very difficult to manage. It was anticipated that at least 11 villages on the downstream to this refinery, with a total population of more than 2,000, will be affected by this discharge. Reports from Nalco refinery area in Damanjodi in Koraput district have shown that the districts have been severely affected by pollution of their streams' release of chemical effluents. The regular pumping of effluents caused regular bouts of cattle death and crop loss, beside causing other natural disasters. Often these dangers emanated from open-cast mining systems, which would seem so terrible to the villagers that they would be forced to flee from their household at the footholds of Baflimali Hills. But as it is known that villagers never wanted to leave their homeland in fear of displacement, but they were always forced to do so. A democratic government does not respect the simple wish of the people. The struggle involved 10,000 or even more tribal people from panchayats of Kuchipahar, Dongasail, Tikri, Kodipadi, Sungir, who actively participated in this movement with people from Maikant to bolster their spirits and to carry out this long-drawn battle against the state and the corporate. After they had an encounter with police, they killed a handful of their comrades. They did not give up the struggle, but they fought even harder. They organized road blockage on December 20, barely 4 days after the grisly police attack, by demonstrating the act in the Rupkona junction. The tribal people in Kashipur region had silently protested and proved that their fight against this monstrous mining would itself acquire its own identity without the foliage of any fanfare. As Bindya Das has rightly said, it is them conviction of a people struggling for the right to survive in dignity and in self-respect. The dangers of mining could not pose same magnitude of threat as it was in this Kashipur region, but the threat varied from places to places. One instance can be the wave of conflict that gathered in the coalfield in two of the districts of Orissa, Jharsuguda and Sundargarh, covering an area of almost 1375 square kilometer. The coalfield was named after a river tributary that was passing through the region, Mahanadi, and the coalfield was an integral part of the Mahanadi Coalfields Limited, or MCL, a subsidiary unit of Coal India Limited. This coalfield was distributed among 5 areas which included Orient, Valley, Lakhanpur, Basundhara and Garjan Bahal. The residents who had benefited from these mining activities for MCL had been compensated by arranging employment, and the wage rate was also given higher than that of agriculture. At the same time, they also received compensation for their displaced land. Despite that, the conflicts gathered around some dimensions here, as Pragya Paramita Mishra had pointed out that they have some demands that MCL needs to pay attention to. These demands vary from village to village. As for example, in Bundia district, they had acute water crisis, whereas in Lajkura, Chalra and Ubuda, rehabilitation problem was not yet being solved. Some villagers in the Ainapalli village were still asking for employment. Their main demand was that they have to be provided with sufficient water and that the blasting and dust could be reduced to a considerable extent. According to the villagers, the company attends to some of their complaints while others remain unattended. They did hunger strike, they went to jail, they even conducted several road blockages, but finally they had to yield to the demands of MCL and government of Orissa. Thus, it can be inferred that mining activities often bring along with necessary evil that seems very difficult to revert to. Nevertheless, the protest of some kind or other accompanying such as mining activities, they refuse to die down the spirits of the scanty public exposure as was seen in the Orissa coalfields. Now, before we go further, it's time for a quiz. The next movement that India saw was the Oil Refinery Movement in the year 1956 and 57. In the post-independence era, the first major exploration of oil field in India began at Naharkatia. This new oil field in northeastern Assam was expected to support a large production which will be able to supply a third of country's requirement for the next 3 years. The Assam Oil Corporation recommended building new refinery at Calcutta, whereas the government of India suggested it to be built at Dhubri in Assam and Barauni in Bihar as possible sites for the refinery. The resolution was to establish the refinery in Assam to moot in the Legislative Assembly in 3rd April 1956, but unfortunately, the central government could not give any definitive assurance. The people in Assam saw the government's moves were being influenced by the imperialist British oil interest. By June 1957, Indian government had already decided to set up the refinery in Barauni in spite of demands from the Assamese people. This led to further political outburst in Assam. The first furious protest for the refinery in Assam took place on 28 August 1956. The movement was jointly initiated by the leadership of the opposition party and the chairman of All Assam Oil Refinery Action Committee. Strikes, public meetings, road blockages, marches were organized to register the gravity of protest. The central government did not bend before hardcore public protest, but decided to establish the refinery in Barauni by an outright ignorance of the regional demand from the Assamese people. This led to further political outburst in Assam. This prompted the All Assam Oil Refinery Action Committee to perpetuate the movement by staging a Satyagraha from 14th August, especially in the areas around the oil fields and in Shillong as well as in other districts of the state. The next movement that India saw was the uranium mining and social movement in Meghalaya, which took place in 1970s and 1980s. The uranium mining in the West Khashi Hills of Meghalaya had generated strong grievances and antipathy among the indigenous people. The state-owned Uranium Corporation of India had repeatedly been denied access to this mineral-rich belt of Meghalaya because of strong local opposition. Despite that, the government was trying hard to win over the local people and to gain access to their territory. A reasonable proposition for some, there was also strong opposition to this from maximum of the people, usually citing health reasons or other issues having to do with the sovereignty and ethnicity of this people, of the indigenous people of this region. According to Hoppingstone, the history of uranium in Meghalaya dated back to 1950s when the Atomic Energy Mining Division started its first primary expedition. Thereafter, a string of investigation followed one after the other between the timeline 1970s and 1980s, eventually leading to this discovery of vast uranium depository in various sites. One of these sites was a village known as Domiasiat in the West Khashi Hills, adjacent to the place where Atomic Mineral Directorate finally began its mining operations to process aluminium ore and produce the much wanted yellow cake. It was encountered that the proposal from the very beginning, when he was acting as an elected member of the assembly and of KHADC, which was a body formed in post-independent India to sustain tribal self-rule in hill areas of northeast India. This was a widespread news of ecological crisis emerging with new mining projects. Lingdok spoke how he got the news of this Domiciat region and how animals and fishes were suffering in these regions from an unknown malady. Strange diseases also started to begin to emerge. It was stated that he started to mobilize people against uranium mining on a larger scale. The headstrong opposition to uranium mining in Meghalaya and people's movement echoed in different dimensions of protest. It was not just a matter of ecological or environmental blunder, but it was also an issue to protect the ethnic sovereignty of the people and also to guard the communal lives of the people of the region. Thus, surely the protests registered against uranium mining gained some magnanimous extent. It was a matter, probably a form of social movement that, though was grounded on the basic ecological issue, was finally meant to cement their mutual bonds of camaraderie and commune and probably a key future to the close-knit conditions of the northeastern region. Next comes the movement against POSCO for steel mining in Orissa, which took place in the timeline between 2015 to 2017. With the liberalization and centralization of our economy, there was an influx of many transnational corporations which were getting attracted towards the mineral hub of Orissa, Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh. Kaliganga Nagar in Jajpur district of Orissa had become one of the hotbeds of commercial interest owing to its nearness to the iron ore mines, one in Sukinda Keonjhar region and other in Sundargarh, and its viable communication to the Paradip port. It was creating a rift of distrust among locals who began resisting the land acquisition by the mining corporation in the first phase of early 2000. On January 2, 2006, 13 Adivasis were gunned down by Orissa police for opposing the Tata Steel. The movement thus was taken off with a zest and force, but it could not do so with full force. The government of Orissa signed a memorandum of understanding with POSCO for establishing 12 million ton per annum integrated steel plant with an investment of 52,000 crores. POSCO was considered as one of the biggest foreign direct investment in our nation at that time, and state government was boastful about it, declaring that it would bring prosperity and well-being to its people. The government's dream project, however, turned into a disaster for all those 22,000 people from the affected areas of Dhinkia, Gajakujanga and Nuangaon Gram Panchayat of Jagatsinghpur district, who dependent on the forest land were soon to be acquired by POSCO. The POSCO Pratirod Sangram Samiti or PPSS, the organization that spearheaded anti-POSCO agitation, resorted to peaceful means of protest such as dharnas, satyagrahas, which saw spontaneous participation from women, children and also the elderly. PPSS did not leave any leaf unturned to dispel the destructive force of POSCO. Despite their honest and peaceful attempts, they were fought back with iron fist and armed police, flag marches, lathi charges, rubber pellets, criminal charges, arrest and also jail terms. One of the most heinous assaults against anti-POSCO agitators took place on 15th May 2010. To protest such gruesome attack, an indefinite demonstration had been staged for scrapping of the project. This had been ongoing for 5 months in Balithuta village, which was considered as the entry point to this area. The villagers who took membership of this PPSS to protest the land acquisition refused the state government's package of 70 crore rehabilitation. Instead of entering into peaceful dialogues with the people, the district administration took resort to violent means to intimidate people with lathi charges, rubber bullets and tear gas shells. People were killed mercilessly, houses were burnt down. They were left shelterless and maimed with no medical help for their disposal. Civic life came to a dead end by the complete takeover of police. District administration carried out land acquisition strategically in a twin phase, one in 2011 and subsequently the other one in 2013. In the first phase, the villagers of Nuangaon willingly let their betel vines and fruit-bearing trees, especially cashew trees, to be mowed down in lieu of the compensation. However, in other villages, POSCO was met with violent resistance, particularly by hundreds of children and women who denied access of the company by stealing the entry points to the vineyards, by organizing prolonged sit-on under the scanning sun as a sign of repulsion. Even with strong police deployment, when the acquisition was resumed back in 2013, it could gain access only to a limited 2700 acres of land, the hub of anti-POSCO campaign. However, in January 2015, following an amendment of the Mine and Mineral Department Regulation Act, especially with the rising allegations of mining scam across the country, POSCO's plans were disrupted. Thereafter, POSCO suspended its project and the project was finally called off its industrialization drive in 2017. The Seed Movement in India. The seed movements in India was launched nationwide by farmers, activists, NGOs, and all those concerned with the well-being of agriculture and its resources. The ownership of seeds was seized by the MNCs and translational corporations. The ritual of seed conservation, its reciprocity was practiced in Indian agriculture for long, was slowly going into oblivion. Some of the seed movements which took place not only in India but across far wide includes the Monsanto Roundup Ready Gene Agreement triggering the gene of protest. According to this agreement, Monsanto, which had emerged as a leading seed company, curbs the right of the farmers for selling or supplying seeds or materials acquired from their crop to any other institution, individual, or for even seed conservation. This agreement also spells the rule to pay $5 per pound in the name of technology fee apart from the price of the seed and other royalty charges. If any of the terms was contravened, the breeder was charged 100 times the damages. Monsanto enjoyed illicit rights to whimsically visit the farmer's field even when the farmer was not present in the field to check their field practices unless they violated the deed rules. The farmers were unhappy with this draconian law of farm because of its double-barreled nature. They complained that Monsanto owns the crop while squeezing millions of dollars as rent from the farmers, but it never owns up to the costs and hazards of the transgenic crop creatings. MNCs like this, instead in the name of crop improvement, created ecological havoc, ended up building an evil system of an absolute privatization benefits. An instance was the totalitarianism which was created by Monsanto's pole god cotton. It was a transgenic variety which concocted the DNA from soil microbe Bacillus thuringiensis to manufacture protein fatal to the bollworms, a cotton pest. The company charged farmers for a technology fee along with the price of seed in exchange of assurance that the pest problem would soon vanish from their farms. Tragically, the technology failed drastically. The bollworm infestation had attacked the genetically modified crops even more than before. Therefore, the genetic seed designed by the company lay bare with their false claim, thus weakening the socio-economic fabric forever. Farmers could not sit mute, but they retaliated back, but their movements was full of angst and pain. Similar kind of movements took place in India in the name of Karnataka Rajya Raitha Sangha, a proactive farmers organization in 1980s, took this kind of measure. Another movement that took place in India was the Beej Bachao Andolan or the Save Seed Movement in Uttarakhand, which took place in late 1980s. The movement gained fame so much so that in 2002, the famous Booker Prize winner Arundhati Roy made a donation of Rs 1.5 lakhs to this Beej Bachao Andolan for the stupendous seed conservation skills of the locals. Seed Satyagraha also took place in India during 1990s. Just as Satyagraha is the way of self-rule or Swaraj, the same is judicially applied to the farmers expressing their right over the local resources. A massive rally was organized in a Delhi march in 1993 where the Memorandum of Farmers' Right was formed. The principle of local sovereignty was adopted wherein it was resolved that natural resources must be treated as belongings of the village itself. In conclusion, I would like to say, all these movements speak of indigenous voices of the local farmers, especially on the eve of such corporate overhauling. In case both land grab movement and seed movement, the contemporary forces of globalization, liberalization and privatization was counteracted forcefully by the local farmers and the indigenous people. The mass protests spoke all over the collective distrust and anger of the poor farmers and indigenous people against the giant corporations and the modern day infrastructures. This will make us aware of the ill effects of biopiracy and how it often leads to the wanton destruction of nature and our indigenous knowledge. Navdanya or 9 seeds, Barnajo or 12 crops are traditional instances of mixed farming practices or polyculture practices that provides immunity against monoculture and helps in bringing and strengthening the ecological strength and fertility of our ecosystem. This diversity, however, was discouraged by the global forces to make more and more profit. However, these protests helps us in understanding that ultimately loss of biopluralism against centralized monocropping system cannot work, and it is essential to save the environment and ecology simultaneously. Thank you.